evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining in tonight for my book chat. My name is Melody McAllister, and tonight I'll be featuring EdTech Essentials, the top 10 technology strategies for all learning environments by author Dr. Monica Burns. And before we get started, I'd like to give a shout out to those watching from our Alice Keeler Teacher Tech community. You can catch this broadcast live on Wednesday nights on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You can catch the replay on these same channels. After reading through the expert effect last week, EdTech Essentials is a perfect follow-up. If you are a teacher who wants to get more into technology, invite the world into your classroom, and make the technology at your disposal more meaningful in the way you use it daily, this is the book for you. Dr. Burns offers insight and wisdom in choosing tech tools for the right occasion, and she sprinkles in tech tips throughout the book to lessen the overwhelm. Oftentimes, we think because our students are growing up in this digital age that they know instinctively how to use all the tech available, but that is a myth. I love how Dr. Burns sets this book up to help us help students at every level navigate the many digital spaces they will encounter and sets up norms for the ones we haven't even experienced yet. You will feel more confident exploring EdTech and setting it up in a way that goes with your lesson flow and delivery in ways that are more relevant for your students when you're reading EdTech Essentials. Dr. Burns, it's such a pleasure to talk with you tonight. How are you doing? And can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I am great, thank you, and just so excited to be here today. Thank you for your kind words about EdTech Essentials. It's been so much fun bringing that out into the world. And yes, I'll share a little bit about my background. I'm a former New York City public school teacher, so I'm based on the East Coast, taught in a classroom for about 6.5 years or so before transitioning to doing some of the work I do now, which is about half of the time writing and sharing different types of content around ed tech, like my book, my blog, Class Tech Tips, and my podcast, the Easy Ed Tech podcast. And the other half of the time, which kind of goes side by side, working with educators, hosting professional development for schools and different organizations, whether that's virtual, like a webinar, or on the ground at a school or district, or a special event like FETC coming up later this month.
That is awesome. And so, like, even through everything that has happened, has it made your professional development, has it picked up a lot with just all the different changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty busy few years leading up to, of course, a big shift in distance learning, hybrid learning, and different learning environments. So before the shift to distance learning in many spaces about 2 years ago now, I was on the road a lot more, also hosting webinars, of course. That shifted a lot last year, the past 2 years, to more of the virtual components, but there's still been some great on site events. I had the chance to work with Wisconsin teachers as well as teachers in Arizona and New York and the second half of last year. And I'll be back out working with some educators on site in addition to virtual pieces over the next few months.
And I'm is it so exciting to like be returning to like actual in-person trainings?
It's a different kind of energy, of course, right? Being in a physical space with educators. It was wonderful hosting sessions just last month where I was able to really walk around the room, right? And peek over someone's shoulder and kind of help them through and talk about different ideas in a way that feels very organic. At the same time, I appreciate all the virtual connections, right? Being able to connect with people who might not be able to attend an event, right? Or be able to go to a conference. So there's so many benefits to both the virtual and the on-site piece. It's one of the reasons why I've always really appreciated a hybrid model when I'm able to do that with a school or organization.
Oh my goodness, you're making me think of so many more questions, but and I'll
Mhm,
stick to some of the ones that we prep for. But tell me, what made you? Because you have several books that you've published, but what?
mhm.
Tell me about what went into EdTech Essentials.
So this is my latest book with ASCD. I published Tasks Before Apps with them several years ago. And so this kind of builds upon that idea of really placing the learning front and center, making sure that we know what it is that we are focused on and using that to drive decision making around ed tech. So this book is all about focusing in on some core areas. These 10 essentials are ones that you might tackle once a month, right, over over the course of a school year. You might say in February, we're focused on this essential. In April, we're really going to dive deep into this particular piece. Or you might decide that you're going to work your way through the book as you're thinking about your own professional goals or areas where you might want to build professional learning for a group of colleagues.
I love that. And I love how you just kind of get into the minutia. So like if a I know that when I started getting into ed tech for the first time, it was very overwhelming. Like it was
Mhm,
like it seemed like technology had advanced, 15 years instead of just 3 years when I had left the classroom for just a little bit. And
mhm,
I wish that I'd had this book because you actually talk about the realistic way to like start looking at, just the different technologies that are out there, but just like start looking at links, like for a teacher to get into that, to know how to present that to her student or hit or their students. And I thought that was probably something that a lot other books that I've read are missing. I liked that component because you're a classroom teacher, or you were a classroom
mhm,
teacher. So
mhm,
I like that you brought that. And another thing that I really appreciated is that you were able to address all K through 12 levels.
mhm.
Was that difficult, or it was just something that because you're? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. And so, when I work with educators for professional development, and, many people with a role like mine are probably, have had similar experiences, where you work with a group and sometimes you're working with teachers who are working with younger students or older students, or sometimes you might have someone in a session that is in a media specialist role and they, help make recommendations for a K-12 group. So because I typically cast a wide net and talk about these foundational pieces with educators and even those cross curricular connections. I come from a background where I taught upper elementary school, all subject areas, right? So, thinking about what might happen over the course of a day, right? You're looking at technology through multiple lenses, multiple content areas. That was really my goal, was for the reader of this book to say, this is where I am now, either with a particular capacity for integrating technology, or this is where I am now in my role in a school. This is the content area I'm focused on. This is the subject matter that I'm working with, a particular grade level, and be able to take away something from the book that they could put into their practice. And, I've worked with schools that are very small, where there's one teacher on each grade level. And then I've worked with schools that are very big, where there's a dozen teachers, right, on one grade level. And so I really appreciate being in different environments where there are educators who might have a planning conversation with someone who teaches students that are 3 or 4 years older than their group.
Mhm.
Yet they can still have common conversations on what are we really trying to accomplish here by bringing digital tools into the equation.
I love that. And you even have like the last chapter is for making that plan to make sure that it's
Hmm.
meaningful. And that like we can be bombarded with one digital app after another. So I especially love that. And so you kind of already did answer this, but when you were writing this, what did you have in mind? Who were you writing to?
So there's a lot of people, different types of educators who come across my channels. And I even think about who listens to the podcast, right? Or who comes to my blog for information, or who's someone who replies to my newsletter with a question. And oftentimes it's someone who is in a classroom, who's really passionate about using technology, interested in it, but may or may not have people around them to ask questions or gather ideas from, that might just have different interests with their professional growth. In addition to those folks who could be peppered in from a whole bunch of different grade levels and content areas, like the ones we just talked about, I'm also thinking about those folks who are supporting their colleagues, either formally or informally. So perhaps they are that media specialist that I mentioned, a digital learning coach, might be someone who's pushing into support from ELA perspective, or a math coach who's coming in to make recommendations or to just talk a little bit about how technology might be used. So, of course, there's people who wear the I'm the tech coordinator hat who might jump into this book, but also those folks who are looking to support their colleagues with the technology, right, alongside the pedagogy or the content knowledge piece. So, trying to cast a wide net while keeping people who are generally interested in ed tech, who are supporting their colleagues with technology integration, really front of mind. And even that planning chapter, like you mentioned, maybe for someone who's in more of an administrative role, who is looking to take that next step and bring their colleagues alongside with them, who may just want a primer, like what should I be looking for when I go into a classroom and offer support? Or where's an area that I really need to bring into a conversation with the educators in my school to say, are we doing this? Or is there a way we could do this a little bit better? Or what do we need to really focus on next? And just give them the language of what's happening in a classroom.
I love how you're describing that. You're just doing it in such a way that I feel like we all know educators who, and probably not as many now since all the hybrid
Hmm.
teaching and everything, but who struggle just to get their email going. And
Right. Hmm.
I just feel like this could be transformative in helping educators like really dig deeper, or just more deeply into what, because we all have it being thrown at us at some point, but just to be able to really get into what they have at their disposal. So that, and I'm sorry that I keep getting tongue tied, but I love that so much. And how did you decide? Like, there's so many. How did you decide 10? What they
Yeah,
would.
so you're absolutely right. Right, there's a bunch of different directions you can go in when you think about technology integration in general. And when I sat down to write this book and had conversations with my editor at ASCD, was trying to be reflective on the conversations that came out of the focus areas within Task Before Apps, my first book with them, and just the conversations that I was having with educators in different parts of the country and some international spots on where they were really looking to build that foundation. And so the 10 was kind of my, okay, let's pause there at 10 big ones, right? Coming back to that concept of if there's 10 months or so of the school year, perhaps there's some planning that could happen around focusing in on each of these 10, right, over a period of time, or picking one or two to focus in on for a school year or for some summer professional learning or something like that, and looking at these as big categories that are able to stand on their own, but then also complement some of the other pieces in here. So, one of the essentials is this idea of explore, right? Being able to use technology to explore different spaces, but it also goes hand in hand with this idea of curating, right? And picking content out that is going to help students go out and explore, or the assess piece that might go alongside that. How are we really going to make sure that this is working, that students are able to share their learning? And that might be where the create piece comes in. So there's a lot of these components that are complementary, right? And you can really look at each of them on their own in addition to side by side. And most importantly, coming back to that first piece we talked about, it can really facilitate conversations around colleagues, right? You can talk about the first chapter of navigating digital spaces. Well, that's a skill that you can build with your kindergarten and first graders who might talk about different icons. And I know this must be how I take a picture because there's a camera there, and you can have really robust conversations about navigating spaces like that. While at the same time, you might have navigational conversations with high school students that are just going to feel a little bit different. So there's that scaling that happens, but then there's also an ability to enter into a conversation on each of these essentials at the level that different educators are at with their own capacity and confidence. So looking at, say, the create chapter, right? Creation or what kids make to showcase their learning is going to look different in a second grade classroom and a seventh grade classroom, but it also might look different for a teacher who is just starting to think about why digital tools might be helpful for creation, who is starting to explore how their English language learners might really benefit from the voice opportunity to talk about something as opposed to just only having a text based opportunity to get started. So I love that, it's an opportunity for teachers to build upon the conversation on how they might bring these different pieces in, and they can have that conversation with a colleague who might be just in a different place with making decisions around technology integration.
Yeah, Wonderfully said. And Grayson, who actually was on
Mhm.
my book chat last week, says he loves the idea of planning with teachers above or below grade level, which he actually does.
Mhm.
So
Oh,
thank you,
great.
Grayson, for that comment. Yes. So wonderful. So what is the biggest mistake that you see in how schools are using technology right now or anytime?
Yeah, I mean, one of the areas that I try to bring up a lot in conversations around technology integration is to simplify as much as possible. And I'll start a conversation. I just did this. I was in Arizona a few weeks ago, and I had a presentation that had a number in the title, right? One of those listicle style presentations. And I said, we're looking at formative assessment. We're looking at a dozen or so strategies here and a dozen or so tools. Do not do all of these things, right? The reason that I framed it this way is in hopes that you would walk away with two or three that resonate with you, and maybe one or two you might recommend to a colleague. It's not to do all the things. So, really coming in and simplifying your tool belt, simplifying your goals is important to me. I mean, I have the name of my podcast is the Easy EdTech Podcast. Like, how can we make this easier? Like, let's dial it back a bit. And one of the phrases I've used a lot this past year that goes along with this is the phrase embrace your place. What's your LMS? Where are you already doing? Don't try and force things to work within that space. If someone told you that Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, whether it's Schoology or Seesaw is your place, even if you might like another place a little bit more, try your best to embrace that place because it's going to make your life so much easier when it comes to workflow and finding things that might complement, and that can even go further to saying, when you look at your tool belt, is there an open ended creation tool like a blank canvas? I do some work with the book creator team. Love that as a great example, right? You could use that as a tool for many different types of projects. Adobe Creative Cloud Express, formerly Adobe Spark. I've done some work with their team. Another great example of that. If you can come back to these tools in your tool belt multiple times, it'll just keep things simple as opposed to using something new just for the sake of it.
Right, right. And so I'm just curious, and I didn't ask you this beforehand, but how did you get into ed tech? Like, what was there like like a gateway technology that really just inspired you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started in a classroom with an overhead projector and chalk and a chalkboard, right? So, like many educators, that was my entry level to my first classroom, was just crossing my fingers that that overhead bulb was not going to die too early in the school year, right? Because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get another one, right? Coming home from work with ink on my fingers from
Yes.
transparency marker, right? Many of us have been there, and some of us don't know that, but many of us have been in that situation. And so what really started for me, beyond, bringing a smart board into the room or trying out some different things or in a computer lab setting was the ability that our school had to go one to one with devices um, in over 10 years ago, right? Going one to one with iPads pretty early on. In
Mhm.
doing that, it was because we became a magnet school. So, a traditional public school, we became a magnet school. We had some funding that we could allocate towards that. The fifth grade, grade level that I was in, we brought iPads in to try that out in our classrooms and see how it would work. This is before Google Classroom, before, right, the way that you might deploy apps. So, very early on. And that's really what started my journey in the classroom. As I was beginning to figure out what was working with my students, what I thought would really resonate with them, the folks at Apple Education had asked me to come and speak a little bit. And I tell this story on my blog. I think it's on the about page of the kind of origin story, if you will. They had asked me to come and speak, and I was under the impression that it was just going to be a couple teachers, a few teachers who might be interested in this. And I showed up, and it was more like a few hundred teachers who were there
Wow.
ready to jot down whatever apps I recommended to them. And that's where my work with finding an answer to the what's your blog, what's your Twitter handle, all these things that when I stepped off stage, in 2000, I think it was 11 no, 2012, I didn't have an answer to, then I was able to go back kind of say, all right, maybe I do have some things to share and write about. And, that's what's bringing us now to 10 years of the blog of Class Tech Tips already. And so it's been a wild few years of thinking through all the different ways to share favorites and ideas with other educators.
I love that. That is a pretty amazing story. And you even in the book, and I'm sure you probably do this in your other books, and it's not always just about tech. Like you even offer some ideas that are non-tech because it's not like, and you say this too, it's you can't replace the teachers,
Mhm.
tech doesn't answer all the problems. And so I appreciate that outlook as well. Are you ready to read us a little bit from your book?
You bet. So I pulled up page 35 here of the book. This is in the Explore chapter that I mentioned earlier, and it's the section on virtual field trips and fostering curiosity. I thought it would be a good fit today. I did a partnership post for Discovery Education earlier this week on one of their virtual field trips and links out to some of my favorite discussion prompts. So I'll go ahead and read this short selection for you. Virtual field trips and fostering curiosity. Providing opportunities for students to explore the world fosters their curiosity. As a classroom teacher in New York City, I loved taking students on field trips, and each year we covered a lot of ground. The list of memorable trips is long, with destinations ranging from the intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum and the American Museum of Natural History to the South Street Seaport and the Museum of Modern Art. One of the most memorable field trips my class of fifth graders took was to Central Park Zoo the year we started a composting effort in our classroom. As we entered an exhibit hall with plants and animals from the rainforest, one of the students said to me, "It smells just like the composting bin." She was absolutely right. The humidity and the fresh soil smelled just like the contents of our class compost bin when we lifted the lid. Providing students with experiences that allow them to explore their world is essential, but it is not possible to physically take them to every place that connects to your curriculum or their interests. The term virtual field trip can refer to many things, including a virtual reality experience in which students wear a headset and turn around as they look at a new place from different angles. It can also mean creating a playlist for students with video clips they can watch to learn about a place. The big idea is simple: give students a chance to learn about and explore a place they cannot visit or have not visited in person. And in the chapter, I go into some more examples and some more discussion questions and pieces that expand upon that. But I love that example. I love that story. I can see it happening, even though it was a bit ago, because it really just illustrates the importance of the balance between the two, those hands on experiences that can really be complemented by the virtual piece.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, and I love that Grayson was watching because you both talk about in your books about how it's so important to not just take your kids because we are used to field trips, even though they are probably not as happening not as much right now. But it's also just to bring the world inside of your classroom, and
Mhm.
it's just it means so much to our students. It makes learning so much more relevant, and it gives them a take on life that they wouldn't see otherwise. And so tell us a little bit. Okay, so this podcast, this is about your virtual reality. That goes with what you just said.
Mhm.
And then this one about the STEM. Why are they your favorites?
Yeah, so I was excited to share this passage with you, not only because I just love virtual field trips all the time and love sharing about some of the discussion prompts, and I put those links in there to share with you too. But also just I want to say not yesterday, I guess, but Monday on the blog, I shared a post about an event that's taking place around STEM. It's a virtual field trip with Olympian Katie Ledecky, and so that post is actually in partnership with the folks at Discovery Education and Panasonic. But it's front of mind for me because I've been tweeting and talking about virtual field trips all week, and it's one of my favorite things to bring into conversations with educators, whether it's using a space like Google Arts and Culture, which is one that I talked about in an ASCD leadership session I hosted earlier today, or perhaps doing a YouTube search with that 360 video file filter at the very top. There's just a lot that you can do for finding free, high quality content. Of course, you could use a headset if that's a good fit for your group of students, but there's plenty out there that allows you to bring it up on a Chromebook, on an iPad, whatever you've got an interactive whiteboard in your room. You can move around and explore different spaces. There's so many options out there of content, and the quality is just getting better and better.
Definitely. I used, Nearpod a lot for that, in
Mhm.
my classroom, and I've never been disappointed. It is fun. And, something about the headsets, they're good and they're fun, but when I'm not using a headset, I'm less likely to get, that kind of sick feeling. I
Yeah.
get motion sickness really easily.
Same here,
Well
and I always tell
yeah.
people in a session, I'm like, "This might not be for you. I'm just giving you a heads up, right? We're gonna look at this, but if you don't love this, no big deal."
Right, that is so cool. So I dropped all of those links, and I'll probably follow up with the blog very soon. And it's just great that you offer all of that. So you are going to be at FETC next week. How can we find you there? Just, I'm
I'm so excited for
yes.
FETC. My AirPods are flying because of it, right? And just my excitement, I can't contain it. It's going to be a really great time, and I'm really looking forward to it. As I mentioned about the two events that I took part in December. So those in-person conferences, it was just wonderful to be around different educators, all the energy around that, and those events. And FETC in 2019 or 2020 in Miami was one of the last events I attended in person. FETC is one of my favorite conferences. I love the size and the scale and just everything that happens during that event. So I'm really excited to head back to Orlando for the first time, probably in 3 years now, since it was there in 2019, to be part of that event, to host a few sessions. I'm actually doing a book giveaway with the folks at Trifera. So I think there's some information about that right on my blog, and happy to answer questions for folks. Or if they're going to be there and they need directions, they can just send me a, a Twitter or Instagram message and I'll tell them exactly where to go for the book giveaway.
I love that so much, and I am gonna put that back. So if you are wanting to
Mhm.
follow Dr. Monica Burns on the socials, it's easy at Class Tech Tips across the socials. That's
Mhm.
because you were first on the scene, like you got your choice. You
Mhm.
have to compete. That is so wonderful. And the EdTech conferences are a different type of energy. It is fun, and people are there to learn more, and that's what I appreciate so much. I hope I get to meet you in person.
I know. I'm gonna make sure to try and do my best. So I'll be there for a few days, and I think it'll be a really great time.
Awesome. And again, I thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Pick up
Mhm.
EdTech Essentials. It's an easy read. It's not very thick. You don't have to
Mhm.
read
Yeah.
it cover to cover. It just like you can find out which one you would like to work on. And if you're picking this up for the spring, I think like I can just see grade levels or school communities coming together to make their technology plan so that it's not like I think oftentimes we as teachers we think, oh my God, not one more thing. Please do not just throw one more
Mhm.
thing of technology onto our plates and we haven't even gotten used to what we have. And you were talking about embracing your place and just
Mhm.
because we all districts have adopted whatever tools they're going to have. How can we use those to the fullest and make it wonderful for our students in their classroom experience? And so I can see this would be actually a great book study. Have you done any book studies?
So for this book, I'll put it here in the chat. I put a free study guide for the book that's really great for book studies. It's just a download, it's a PDF here. And so for this one, it has 10 pages, like a workbook. And so there's questions that you can use for a book study.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that. We love free.
Yeah. Same here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Burns, and thank you everybody else. Get this book if you love it. Make sure to leave a review. I won't see anybody next week because we will be in Florida, and so
Mhm.
anybody that's going to be there. I hope that you will come and say hello to us. And I hope that your presentations go well, your book giveaway. That is so exciting. Again, thank you for being with us. Everybody, we'll see you again sometime soon. And good night. All right.